Hi, all. Thanks so much for watching Making Healthcare Work for You, Different Perspectives and Empowering Solutions. I'm Stephanie Fields, joined by my co-host, Dr. Apoorv Gupta, and today we are talking to Geoffrey Smith, who has a background in employee engagement, created a new podcast called Mo-Ments of Experience, named after his dog and personal experiences. And he wants to make a positive impact on all of those who give and receive care. So with that, why don't you just start by what led to this? Because you spent decades helping people with these transformations and employee experience or employee engagement, but then it was an actual real life moment that turned everything for you. So why don't you tell us that story?
Yeah, so I have over 25 years in employee engagement, leadership development, culture change initiatives in the workforce. And for the last decade, I've been 100% dedicated to healthcare, the healthcare industry, which is quite unique as it relates to employee engagement. I always like to say employee engagement in many industries is often just quote unquote buzzword, but in healthcare, it's a necessity for optimal patient outcomes. Uh, so I was working in the healthcare industry, but it wasn't until I started seeing things through the patient's eyes as my wife battled cancer that I truly understood my 25 years of work, that I got to see firsthand my wife hang on every word and instruction of the nurse that made her laugh and coincidentally tune out the physician that wouldn't even make eye contact. So you really saw those moments, and I got to do kind of my own non-scientific study. I'm basically a been involved in a lot of research in the human capital management business, but this was a different where I just got to observe. I got to observe the dynamic teams that provided care, which is different than in any industry. And it was just a great experience to grow and to learn and to be motivated to pursue a different purpose. And about 15 months ago, I left a cushy corporate job and started off because I just knew there was something more for me to give to those that both provide and receive care.
Jeffrey, that's such a touching story. I've heard you tell it before, and it's really heartwarming to kind of understand that this is sort of what it takes. Even us as professionals, we're just going about our work. We think we're making a difference, but we really don't understand it until we get it that deeply as you did in helping your wife do what she was going through. There was another moment I think you talked about that recently where you were talking about your dog and how that really kind of became such a critical turning point moment for you. Maybe you can describe that a little bit and what that meant to you.
Yeah, so my dog, I have a 14-year-old beagle. His name is Mo. My name of the podcast is Mo-Ments of Experience, moments in employee, patient, caregiver, and just human experience. And when we were going through my wife's battle with cancer, very difficult. We lost our only child on the eve of her first chemo treatment. And I just had one job, and that was just to get my wife to even want to fight. She expressed an interest in just letting cancer run its course and being reunited with her son. And it wasn't until Mo, our dog, gave us some moments uh, that really truly energized us to fight. If anyone has a dog, especially a beagle, they love their meal times. They love their walks. They love chasing squirrels up trees, bunnies in the backyard. But when my wife was going through this and probably crying justifiably 20 hours a day until she just passed out from exhaustion, he would not leave her side. Every tear would be licked off her face one at a time. Um, the first night she went to sleep bald after losing her hair to cancer, he put his head on top of hers as if to say, I'll keep you warm. And so Mo gave us gave us hope when we really didn't have any for our own. And so that's why the podcast is named after him. And when you see these moments, your life changes because what you realize is you don't sweat the small stuff. And when I looked then back at my career, I said, I'm not doing enough of what I love. And I have this high paying, cushy corporate job. And I just said one day, it's time for me to love every minute of what I do, not just 20 to 30%.
You told us the story in the pre-interview of while you were still working at that corporate job, you were doing a presentation. It was all whiteboards and PowerPoints and all these things, but your wife was being treated at the same hospital system that you were training at. And you said you went and it became kind of a challenging environment during those meetings with people resisting what you were trying to share. And then you go and you see your wife, and that changed the whole course of the day. And then ultimately, one of those pivotal moments. So can you tell us that story?
Yeah, so I was doing an all-day workshop around leadership development and employee engagement. How engagement impacts outcomes, and we were working this with 25,000 plus academic health system, and we were bringing different parts of the organization throughout the day: OD and LD for 90 minutes, C-level for 90 minutes, nurse leadership. And when we got halfway through the day, we broke for lunch. And as you said, my wife happened to be 800 yards away from the CHRO's boardroom, getting prepped for a bone marrow transplant and in the cancer center. So when we broke for lunch, I walked across the street, walked into a room. Her nurse had her arm around her, and my wife was crying. And I just ran over and I said, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Because Gloria didn't bring me my lunch today. Gloria sings to me when she brings me my lunch." And it was just this. It was like I said before, it was the collision of personal and professional worlds. And I'm over there with whiteboards and PowerPoints, and a food service employee is impacting my wife's mood as she fights for her life. And this is what I talked about earlier. I mentioned the dynamic teams that impact our patient experience. So when I went back over to the second half of the workshop, there were a couple of detractors in the crowd pushing back on some of our ideas and concepts. And I just raised my hand. I said, "Can I tell everyone a story? It's about 45 minutes old." And the tenor of the meeting changed. We got away from bullet points and whiteboards, and we started talking about true human connection, love, compassion, what truly impacts the patient experience and ultimately the outcomes. And it was kind of the moment that started me down the journey of evaluating, do I do enough of what I love? Because if I could do that every day, I'm in. But it was the 70% of the time where I was dealing with other stuff, like commoditized payroll or tax compliance, that was just such a downer. I just said, no way. Everything I do from the day I left, everything I do has to impact patient outcomes.
Yeah, it's a really real moment that you were able to experience and share with the teams. And I'm glad that it had that kind of impact on them to say, hey, this isn't just about a PowerPoint and something we get to argue in a conference room here. This is impacting people's lives. It's really profound, the power of stories and your personal story, what you and your wife were going through. Thank you for sharing that, Geoffrey. One of the points you just made in that story was about dynamic teams, which I really wanted to underscore because that's something that you and I have talked about quite a lot. And every time we talk, as I've mentioned to you, I learn more. It's incredible the wealth of knowledge that you have on this topic. So maybe we can open that up a little bit. What is it that people don't realize about dynamic teams, particularly in healthcare? That if we understood better, we could actually create more loving and compassionate environments.
Yeah, so I had the privilege. So these weren't my concepts or my research. I had the privilege of learning from one of the world's most prominent researchers on people, performance, team dynamic, engagement at work. And there is just so much data they had. But when I started to learn more about it, my niche became, okay, healthcare is different than the manufacturing world. How do I take this wonderful concept that these brilliant people have come, and how do I healthcareize it? And when we talk about dynamic teams, you start to see, and once again, I saw all the research, I knew all of this, but it wasn't until my personal experience with my wife's battle did I see how Gloria worked with environmental services, who worked with the social worker, who worked with the nurse and doctor in a team that doesn't necessarily tree up to a traditional HR org chart, and how the team leaders affected these teams, even though this person didn't officially report to this person. The team leader was still at the forefront of this dynamic team. And during my wife's journey, being my work for 25 years, I was fascinated by watching how these teams work together to provide care. And there was one time I walked up to the team leader And I just said to them, what are you doing? Because the feeling on this floor is different than any other feeling I have, different than any other experience we're having in this healthcare system. And the leader just looked at me and said, Jeff, it's kind of simple. We just lead with compassion. And when you see these groups, and this is something that I am very much evangelizing in healthcare, which is it's great when I get the aha moment from healthcare administrators, but it's very frustrating because I like to say healthcare is at the forefront of clinical innovation, yet they lag probably 25 to 30 years behind the private sector and people strategy. So many healthcare organizations still view engagement as a once a year survey versus the living, breathing, shift to shift, patient to patient mood and feeling of engagement to their purpose that it truly is. So one of the things I evangelize, because I don't believe an annual survey gives healthcare executives anything actionable. It's too much information, but looking at it top down. So one of the things I speak to healthcare organizations is looking at employee engagement in real time and looking at it bottom up, team by team. Because when you measure something team by team, you actually have something actionable now. Because you're looking at a smaller pocket. You're looking at a small group of people. And when you find out where your pockets of brilliance are, your teams, your high performing teams, your 5 out of 5, all in, I'm completely connected to my purpose, engaged. When you find out where that is, then guess what we also find? Where our best team leaders are. And then it becomes a model. We model our best team leaders and we answer one actionable question. How do we make more teams like our best teams?
That's incredible. It actually reminds me of the interview that we did with Dr. Helen Reese of Empathetics. And, it's a very similar thought process. We want to get these things that are actionable and take them in increments, not say like, oh, here's this massive thing once a year that, you may or may not care about. And I think part of that too, when you have so many of those annual things that have like 58 questions, it's hard for the employees to believe that you actually care because you can't do 58 things in a new and better way. And so it almost just seems like a throwaway type of thing to them.
And it is. And I'll tell you something, the 58, 69, whatever number of questions. So that group, that research group I worked with for years, is led by Marcus Buckingham. He did the research on all those 58 questions. And what he found was, when he compared the answers of, do I have a best friend at work? He compared the answer to high performing teams and low performing teams. And guess what? They answered the same way. So you know what he did? He threw it out because it doesn't help measure anything accurately. It's a throwaway question to your point. It doesn't make employees feel seen, heard, appreciated. So he revamped the way you measure engagement, because what the research shows is people are very poor raters of other people. Like, for example, performance reviews. Performance review tells you more about the team leader than it tells you about the person being rated. So what he found was, what people are really good and accurate raters of? How something makes them feel. So when you ask a question about how something makes you feel, you can 100% certainty know you're getting an accurate answer. And the one question that is the highest indicator of employee engagement, and it's a scale of 1 to 5, strongly agree to don't agree at all. And it's, do my teammates have my back? And when people answer 5 out of 5, he limited it to 8 questions. That's one of the 8. When they answer 5 on that team has a very good chance of being all in, fully engaged.
How do you foster that type of situation? Because in the story you were telling me before, it's when you have these groups and you go and say, what are you doing differently? How are you making this feel? How do you harness that and get people to care every day because it's so hard. I think part of it is what you said. Do people have my back? It's also taxing the work that they're doing. And in my own experiences, that's when I've seen some people just don't care because how do you avoid it from becoming a job? It's in so many ways, healthcare has to be different like you said, it's not a hierarchical thing. It is, there's a hierarchy, but to get the patient experience is not, okay, well, if we improve this, then we get this and this. It doesn't boil up like that. It's you have all these rogue things like in Pac-Man. Oh my God, okay, well, I need to make sure that this environmental services person is fine and this cafeteria person is fine and that secretary answered the phone nicely. Because I can tell you in the NICU, if I called at 4 a.m. and the person who answered the phone seemed annoyed, then I'm annoyed. And then, if they're treating me like that, they're probably somebody who they're super comfortable with on their team, a tech, they're probably not treating them nicely. And then I wonder what are they doing with my daughter? I mean, it's a whole trickle down thing. So how do you harness all these little Pac-Man ghosts to get them into one place so they can get to the cherries on there?
Yeah, it's not easy, right? When you think about it, but there is a secret sauce and to employee engagement, and it's really around the team leader. And what the research shows, it's really attention, attention from the team leader. Do employees feel heard? Do they feel respected? Do they feel listened to? And by the way, if you're a nurse leader with a 90 to 1 span of control, that's not easy to give 90 people attention. So one of the terminology we used to use in healthcare, and I still use today, is how do we turn span of control into span of attention? And I think one of the most challenging things in healthcare today, and one of the other thing, other than the power of teams, the other thing I evangelize on a daily basis with healthcare administration, and one of the biggest problems in leading to disengagement is a lot of times healthcare administration doesn't engage the front lines in problem solving for problems the front line have. And when you don't feel seen, heard, and appreciated, like when doctors and nurses don't have a seat at the table when we're discussing frontline problems, that leads to mistrust and that leads to disengagement. So one thing I like to say, engage the front lines in your problem solving. It's their problem you're trying to solve. Engage them, and then that brings back the trust, and then the engagement comes after that. So one of the things I work with nurse and clinician entrepreneurs daily that are frustrated that they can't get their wonderful ideas into a healthcare organization because of that lack of trust between the administration and healthcare. So I work every day to repair that and bring those two sides together to the table, because when we have trust and we have people feeling heard, listened to, and respected, we'll have engagement. Like I know the answers to the test. It's just a matter of getting people to view things uh, not that's not the way we've always done it.
So Geoffrey, as you know, we both, Stephanie and I, both find this fascinating. In my day job, as you know, I work as a consultant, and we're driving organizational change all the time. And now we're trying to drive this whole loving organization movement specifically around culture change, creating environments within which we have compassion and love. And I think the intervention you're describing is really, really powerful. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit, if you don't mind. I guess I'd like to understand, you mentioned that healthcare is decades behind other industries. So I'd like to understand, are there other industries that really have solved this? Do we have industries wide solutions that we could maybe emulate, and or at least examples of organizations from other industries that we should be looking at? So maybe let's start there.
I mean, yeah, there are a lot of huge organizations that have adopted this bottom up, including one of the largest health systems in the country. It's harder in healthcare to get that aha, where they get it and they realize something actionable is better than something not actionable. Uh, but yeah, there are wonderful organizations. Cisco has implemented a bottom up approach. And healthcare organizations are going there, but it's just how do we, especially when you look at the demography of the workforce, The demography of the workforce is changing at a pretty big tipping point right now as our largest generation is retiring or has retired. And the new generation of worker views things differently. So in turn, as people leaders, we have to view things differently. My mom was an RN for 47 years. She went to nursing school at Middlesex Hospital. Okay. 47 years later, she retired from Middlesex Hospital. That is not happening in today's world of work. So we have to have different ways to engage a multi-generational workforce than how we've always done it. And unfortunately, healthcare is behind the times on how we've always done it. Stephanie, you mentioned earlier, the once a year event. I was brought into a hospital once to solve first year nurse retention. And when I asked them their people strategy, they outlined the annual engagement survey. And I said, how long until you have something actionable from that survey? And they said, well, about 19 months. And I just looked around the room and I said, and I was just waiting for someone to say it for me because I didn't want to sound a little, you know, but I said, okay, so we're trying to solve a 0 to 12 problem with 19 months. Like we're going to have to rethink the strategy if we want to make true impact.
Really, really, really enjoyed this conversation with you, Geoffrey. I think it's very enlightening in many ways. I guess for my final question, I'd come back to the point of what you're talking about in terms of the teamwork. You've talked to me previously about a solution called Standout that you implemented in one of your organizations, and I found that to be particularly helpful way for leaders to understand how they could create engagement. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Standout it was originally an offshoot of the original StrengthsFinder. But with the improvement of putting people in to figure out their strengths, putting people in real world scenarios. StrengthsFinder really tells you what your strengths are, but Standout tells you how your strengths show up to your teammates. Okay, so it's more actionable in a team environment. And this really comes down to that span of attention I mentioned. Standout allows you to have weekly check-ins with your people electronically and to ask simple questions like, what'd you love this week? What didn't you love? And how can I help you? So in today's, especially the evolving workforce, sometimes digital connection is just as good as face-to-face. And it allows leaders to figure out where their attention needs to go each and every week. And it gives people that attention where people feel heard, people feel listened to, people feel supported. And it's also a way to measure engagement and to do it not once a year. Okay. Do we take the pulse of our patients once a year? We need to take the pulse of our employees in real time, where you're doing it maybe quarterly, maybe you're doing it monthly, but you're just asking 8 simple questions, not 58. And you're taking the pulse of your people, you're taking the pulse of your organization, you're finding where your pockets of brilliance are, and then you're making more teams like your best teams.
That's incredible. I love that. And it actually reminds me of something I read in Jack Canfield's Success Principles, where he said something that he does is he asks his wife, all the people who report to him directly, his kids, what have I done well? Where can I improve every week?
Yep.
Which is probably like, oh my God, why are you asking this question again? But he takes it seriously and really does make an effort to change that. And I kind of do that with my daughter, and she's just like, oh my God. Like yesterday, I actually asked her, I said, what is something that you really love about mommy? And she said, you're patient. I was like, whoa, that's not what I thought you'd say. And she said, but I love this. And I thought, oh, I have to tell Apoorv, and I forgot. She said, I love that both you and daddy put yourselves in the shoes of other people and think about their feelings before you make decisions. And I thought, I never would have thought she said that. I would have thought she said, daddy's really awesome at the claw machine or something like that. So those things do matter. Asking people the questions that they believe you're going to make a change or deliver on matters to them. And I'm so thankful for this conversation. It was fantastic. And you gave us so many tactical ways that anybody can really turn things around. So this was fantastic. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Geoffrey. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.